Good afternoon. Welcome to our Budget Committee meeting today. What we have on the agenda are our Results Minneapolis departmental reports. We're going to get through 4 departments today. I want to welcome, in addition to our committee, Mayor Fry. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making results an important part of your work in our budget process. I have with me today at the dais Council Members Warsame, Schrader, Fletcher, and myself. Councilmember Reich will be here momentarily, and so will Council Vice President Jenkins. We're going to start. The order of presentations today are going to be reordered a little bit. Councilmember Lisa Goodman is at the Family Housing Fund session where she's assigned to this outside board. Because we are lacking city participants at that board meeting, she needs to go, though she wants to be here for the reg services end. So we have reordered today with the help of the different department directors, and I appreciate your flexibility. We're going to start with finance and property services, and then go to the city clerk's office, and third we'll do internal audit, and we will end with reg services. Hopefully she can get out of that meeting in time to get here for that. Thank you for joining us, Councilmember Reich, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you, Director Ruff, for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Mark Ruff. I'm the city's Chief Financial Officer and also the department head for the Finance and Property Services Department. Quick reminder, our department encompasses 250 people approximately, and we have several divisions which accomplish, on a daily basis, as all the city departments, a lot of good work for our residents, our taxpayers, our ratepayers. And just want to say a moment of thanks really to our division directors. A few of them are here today. I know others are watching over online, but we have some very high quality people working in our department, and I'm grateful for their support. In particular, we have with us Mike Intramill and Lori Johnson, who also can obviously answer any detailed questions I may call upon them that the council may have. The other is, I think, when we talk about performance metrics, we all know that there are those that can be quantified, and there are those that are tougher to quantify. But for us as a Finance and Property Services Department, our biggest metric is your trust. I mean, your trust that we can deliver information to you that allows you to make thoughtful decisions about important public policy issues, and clearly the budget is one significant part of that, but also the investments we make in our facilities as well. And I don't want to diminish the importance of property services and the work that they do. They are a significant amount of the employment within our department and a significant part of what we do to support especially public safety and public works facilities. And just also want to thank the council and your investment in those facilities that has been accelerated over this very short period of time that I've been here for 3 years. So with those introductory remarks, I'll dive into the report. The different program summaries are really aligned with our different divisions within our department. And so we have several divisions. As I said, property services is a significant part of that. One of the metrics that's highlighted here is we have our city energy manager in property services, Brian Milberg, many of you know, and has some very good news to share in the sense of a key metric is the overall city carbon emissions. And this particular chart highlights the work and the direction that the mayor and the council have given to our staff to see the city's carbon footprint diminished significantly. One of those was this landmark decision that you all made about moving to 100% renewable electricity for our enterprise within a fairly short period of time. And I'm happy to say that the results are demonstrated in this chart, which is a reflection not just of our electrical energy use, but also overall the city's carbon footprint. So in terms of results, I think this is real and tangible, and one that is certainly one that we are proud to share the spotlight with you as a council and as a mayor in meeting what is a very important public policy goal for not just the city, but for the world as a whole. And we continue to actively work on small ways and large ways to reduce our carbon footprint in cooperation with other city departments, especially Public Works being a very significant player in this realm. The other area which we're keenly aware of importance, which is our controller, our accountants. As you know, the city has a more unusual tradition of having accountants from each department report up through a centralized finance department, and that we're appreciative of that. We think that gives us a better management structure, a better internal control structure, and is good for the enterprise overall. We do work with the state auditor, as you're aware, on our annual financial report. It's called a CAFR, or a Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. And one important part of that report is the outside auditors saying to us, what are some significant issues that we need to pay attention to? And every CAFR has some significant audit findings. Our goal is to minimize those audit findings. And so each year we not only receive those findings, but the subsequent years the auditors follow up on them. And you can see on this chart, it's neither a positive or a negative in the sense that we know we will always have things to work on, but that trend is not going up. Our hope is that that will continue to go down as we address those through the work with Lori Johnson and Lyle Hodges, our city controller. Revenue and collections, a significant part of our employment also within our department is utility billing. Even though this is shown as a general fund activity, in reality it is funded through a contribution from our utility funds. When I talk about utilities, it's sewer, water, stormwater, sanitary sewer, and refuse waste collection. So our department collects those bills. We try to make that as easy as possible for people, and also you can see our metrics being the percentage of utility billing that is done electronically. And again, those are stable at this point in time. Procurement, obviously Pam Fernandez and her team, significant part of working with all departments on how we buy things, how efficient we can make those things, and that efficient in terms of low cost, but also our diversity of spend. And happy to say that we are being cognizant of making sure we not only how we procure things, but also within that division is how we pay for things. And so one of our metrics being we want to pay people, especially our target market providers, as quickly as possible. And so that's a good trend to seeing in the right direction. Risk management, obviously in recent week, we've had a heightened awareness of risk management and the role that our folks play not only in tort liability, but also in workers' comp. And workers' compensation claims generally have been going in a good direction, although there's certainly some other things that are happening recently. We can talk with council revolving around workers' comp claims and PTSD claims, but generally moving in a solid direction as well. Payroll, the number of W-2s, it's kind of shocking when you look at the numbers that despite what's thought about as our number of full-time employees, last year we actually issued over 10,000 W-2s. So in other words, we had people on the payroll, even for a short period of time, that totaled over 10,000. And that staff does a remarkable job for the work that they do. Development Finance, Mark Winkelhag and his group. Sales tax revenue as a metrics is obviously one that we don't have a great deal of control over on a daily basis, but we think it's a good indicator of the overall financial health and the work that we do to support CPED and NCR through development finance. And again, that's a positive trend. Budget, Micah has done an outstanding job on the work with budget and the budget team. I think one of those things, and especially help from the city clerk's office, is not just looking at financial transparency in a narrow band, but also making our documents more accessible. I will tell you that when I get calls from reporters now, one other softer indication of this metric is that reporters oftentimes have, before they even talk to me, gone to our budget website and have looked up pages in our budget before they ask questions, which to me tells me that we are much more transparent, because that did not happen when I first started. Investment, capital, and debt, Mike Gablin. We've merged these areas for debt and investments, and we are, as we've talked about, diversifying the number of firms that we work with on investments. And then also bond ratings, which is one of the larger metrics that I'm happy to talk about in detail if the council would like to, but we see very good synergy between those, and again, a stable indicator. And then the last is just a small group that works with Lori and I on the executive administrative side. So with that, those are the different divisions and a short overview of the summary of metrics. From my perspective, there's always lots of room for process improvement within our particular city, and we are cognizant of that on a daily basis, but I feel just generally as a department head that the trends are all positive. The last thing that I want to highlight as one of the metrics is overall as a department is actually revisiting financial policies on a regular basis, which sounds like one of the most boring things that we can talk about. But honestly, Standard & Poor's, one of the rating agencies, one of their significant portions of ratings is evaluating management. And when you talk about management, it's not staff. Management is council, mayor, and staff, right? And one of the important factors of management that they use as an indicator for all cities across the nation is how many financial policies do you have in writing, and how often is the council actually getting to hear about those financial policies as opposed to something that's buried or not visited more than once every decade. And so, it's one of those things that we are going to lift up even more. We've been doing that with you on investment policy. We will be bringing forward things about debt policies. We've been looking at our travel and our food policies. Those are things that we need to do more often to refresh, because every time we pull, my experience, again, in 3 years, every time we pull one of those policies up, something unexpected comes out of that discussion, and usually to the better, which is, oh, we haven't thought about this, and we should probably change how we're undertaking this particular process. So that's a brief overview of our department and our work, and just want to also thank Andrea, Brian, and Jonathan on their work and pulling this report together. I think they did a great job. So, pause for questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. A quick question, since you're on this slide 2 about procurement. What is the goal number of days to pay? Is 15 good or bad, regular, relative to our expectations and the different groups we have been working with and the ways we've been trying to work with more local small businesses and target market businesses?
Right. I'll take an opportunity to answer it, and then if there's deeper questions, we can bring Lori up. But there are a couple other ways to look at this metric. One is, one of the things that we have been that has been highlighted in our annual audit from the state auditor is we do have a state law that says we're supposed to pay our bills roughly within a month, right? And so there are a percentage of bills which were not paid within that month, which the auditor says you're violating state law, so you need to do better at this. So Lori has taken a tremendous amount of time working with staff to identify, again, process improvement. One of the things that was happening was vendors were dating a bill, for example, May 1, but not actually sending it to us until May 15th. And we had no process of actually stamping that bill as to when we received, so that when the auditors pulled that bill, they didn't see May 1, they actually saw received on May 15th, and that's when the 30-day or 35-day clock starts, right? So there's also a philosophy that says for larger companies, that's part of our contract, is we don't need to pay them within 2 days because we should keep our money for as long as possible. And for larger companies, we're just, by paying early, we are giving them some of our interest earnings, right? So there is a philosophy that says we should wait until the last day before we have to pay contractually, right? And we contrast that with our smaller vendors who really live paycheck by paycheck and need to have that work. So in our system, we have put in for target market vendors, pay immediately. In other parts of our system, we take a couple of weeks to make sure that all of the contracts are aligned. And frankly, that's the other reason that we are oftentimes delayed in paying bills, is we have, as you see on the agendas, contracts, amendments to contracts, and then we have to calculate, have we paid more than what the contract allows? And with all of the amendments that come through, it's not just a simple push of the button, let's double check it. So we've been trying to improve that system as well. So that's a longer answer to you, that I don't know that we have targeted an average number of days. It's just a different way of looking at it, and one metric that we feel is at least informative as to how best to measure it. But there's, as always, a longer story behind it.
Thank you. I think that's important context to keep in mind. I want to also mention we've been joined by Councilmember Cunningham. I want to mention to my colleagues that we have speaker management up. I'll also be looking for flags, and we have Councilmember Cunningham in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for being a little bit late. My office hours ran until 1 o'clock, so I got here as soon as I could. Mr. Ruff, I had a question around the investment diversity numbers. I see that in 2018 we moved from 4 to 12, which is exciting. I'm curious as to how many of those are minority-led investment firms?
Right. Madam Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, for this, that number of vendors, those are primarily our short-term money investments. When I mean short-term, it's the money that goes up and down with tax receipts and our level of expenditures, and we manage that process internally. We did a request for proposals, and primarily the request for proposals came back as institutions, which are largely publicly traded institutions, or they are community banks. And so I'm not aware of any of them being solely owned by or a partnership of women or people of color because of that just nature of size. And when I talk about institutions, it's like a Bremer Bank is part of that, so a more regional bank or a merchants bank as well. So we've talked about in the past, and the mayor and council made an emphasis that we hope that Village Trust gets to the point where they can be one of those vendors when they reach a level of maturity that we can work with. There is a second layer of investment services, which is our longer term investments, and by longer term it's 3 to 5 years. We don't go long on the city. That request for proposals was actually just talked about this morning at Ways and Means agenda setting, and that will be on the agenda for Ways and Means next Tuesday. That is an area where there is more opportunity for having women and minority-owned businesses actually participate in that process. But again, it's a request for proposal process, and we'll have to bring those in and talk about capacity and ability. But that would be an area where those individualized longer-term services could be implemented, as opposed to this money that comes in and out on a regular basis, which does usually require a larger institution to have kind of the capacity to move that money in and out. These are more management of firms, which lends the latter being management of firms, which lends itself to smaller business participation.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that clarification. I think that as we're talking about diversifying the investment portfolio to ensure that we're being mindful, because it says here that by that this particular approach also provides opportunities and funding for smaller organizations to participate in the local economy. So just want to be mindful that we are investing in women and minority-led businesses. So thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Just one other smaller side of that is we all know that that very large banks have some track record that many people aren't happy with, and so I'm expanding in this particular case, maybe appropriate or not, the idea of diversity in the sense that I think competition's a good thing, right? And so if we only have 2 large banks who can work with us over the next 15 or 20 years, that's not a healthy thing. So supporting smaller banks to become more competitive with larger banks, especially those like that may have alternate interests. Many of us have used Bremer as an example because Bremer is owned by a foundation, right? So it is not able to be bought and sold in the same way that other banks are. It's just an example of that kind of also emphasis for what's good for all citizens longer term is to have more competition within the marketplace. In addition, I'm not diminishing from your comments, I just want to add to that level of, in this particular context, diversity is large and small as well.
I hear that. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you for this presentation. I think this is an area that the city should feel very good about our financial standing. I think in general, we do a very good job. So thank you to everyone in your department for some very good work. I think even with some very tough financial decisions we've had to make, getting the news that we maintained our AAA rating from Standard & Poor's for bonds, even in spite of a bit of a shock to our self-insurance, I think shows that we're managing this in a very responsible way. So I want to appreciate that and appreciate the transparency. I think we've had some very good conversations both in Ways and Means and in the budget process about the transparency of this process, and I think we can continue to push for. And one of the things that maybe we want to think about how to really dial in on is the ways that we can use those policies not just to create transparency, but actually to really move the needle on. And I know it's something we're working on, but I think that we can do better on around our equity goals, around really thinking about how do we use procurement to make sure that we're investing locally and investing in women and people of color vendors. How do we make sure that we're continuing to dial in on all the ways that we can use, this is a city with some significant financial clout, and so if we have bonding capacity, if we have loan guarantee funds, ways that we can use the capital that we have to support a lot of the stuff that needs support in our city, I think we want to be creative and continue to think about how to do that. But the transparency and the policy work and the solid financial management is the foundation that we can build all the rest of that work on. So really just want to appreciate that work.
And Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Fletcher, I appreciate that very much, and I know that in last year's results meetings, we had this conversation with Councilmember Palmisano, and I've talked with Councilmember Warsame as the Chair of Ways and Means about this, but I also want to hold up bond ratings as an example of an area where being a AAA may not be in the best interests of the city's citizens overall. And so what I mean by that is we're very grateful, as you said, for the AAA from Standard & Poor's. We have a AA plus from Fitch. Part of the concerns with Fitch is our not just level of pensions, but also level of debt. And you as a council may feel that undertaking some of the programs that you just highlighted, which adds debt, and we don't want to add debt for the sake of adding debt. We want to add debt responsibly. But let's just say we choose to use debt for a particular new initiative. That may not be within the metrics that Fitch says is really AAA, because remember, bond ratings are grading on a curve, right? We're being compared to our friends in Edina. We're being compared to very wealthy communities around the United States, which don't have the same challenges that a large city has. And so we may be bringing to you some thoughts in the future that says, listen, if we do this, probably our chances of getting back to a AAA with Fitch are reduced because they have very specific metrics. They're much more regulated. And that can be a choice. And we'll also give you the trade-offs, which says that we have to maybe spend a little bit more on interest, but here's the quantifiable amount of what that little bit more of interest cost is, and you as policymakers can weigh what you think is more important. Now, I wish I could say it's like here's the tipping point. $100 million more of debt is going to make a difference. I mean, that's not reality, but I just want you to know that that's an element that whenever we deal with metrics that we have to be aware of, which is we're being graded on a curve. In that particular case, it's not an absolute.
If I can respond, that's a really helpful reminder, and I think what I really value is that I feel like if and when we make that choice, and I think it's entirely possible that we won't agree with Standard & Poor's at some point about what the best thing is for our city, that we're making that choice intentionally and with a lot of transparency about the kind of commitments that we're making and the kind of financial choices that we're making. And so I think that's very important, and I appreciate you kind of empowering the city to make that choice together and in a clear-headed way.
On that note, I did see from you, Director, an email yesterday about our current bond rating that just came out. Would you like to share that news? Because it wouldn't be in this results report, which would be about last year's data, but it is important in
Sure.
this discussion to maybe share that update.
So thanks, Councilmember Palmisano. So we as a city have now developed a cadence of going to the financial markets and borrowing money twice a year. We do it in the spring and in the fall. In this particular case, we're undertaking a variety of bond issues. They're your basic infrastructure revolving around sewer, water, some streets, parks, housing improvement area, which is one of these programs that Councilmember Fletcher highlighted, which is us helping to back a condo or townhome association to get them cheaper rates. And so we do credit ratings or credit reports, and so we sit down as a team with the credit rating agencies at least 2 or 3 weeks before they announce the latest bond rating, and we have done that. And so Standard & Poor's did affirm our AAA rating, and Fitch did affirm our AA plus rating. And so I think overall, we benefit not just from city operations, but those ratings are also reflective of the economy that we live in as the Twin Cities as a whole, and we are an incredibly diverse economy, not relying on one industry, healthy overall income levels. So that's part of what ratings reflect, but they also, I mean, I'll just use another specific example. One of the areas that Fitch is watching is also, we are also affected by how much debt the school district issues and how much debt the county issues, because there are overlapping jurisdictions. We have the same taxpayers, right? And ultimately, ratings are a reflection of our ability and willingness to pay debt. And most of our ability and willingness comes from property taxes. And so because we share those taxpayers. And so those jurisdictions are actually borrowing more money too, and that has an impact on us as well. So that's the only probably new information that we can share with you out of that, is that we are all tied together as a community, and even rating agencies see that. But overall, they were, the issue of self-insurance fund, I was able to have a direct conversation with the analysts, both analysts from each of the firms, and they were not concerned, but they certainly want to hear about our plans longer term. And so I don't think there's anything in the written reports, but those are public documents. So if any citizens want to see those, you have copies of them, and feel free to forward those so people can read it for themselves. It's a good outside party.
Thank you. Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins, for joining us. A question about historical city sales tax revenue. In 2018, the city collected almost $90 million in sales tax revenue. This was an increase of about 65% when we compared it to sales tax revenue in 2009, or during the heart of the economic recession. Could you highlight the efforts taken by the city to increase the sales tax revenue?
Sure. Madam Chair, there are some factors that have been the direct result of city efforts, and some obviously indirect. One of the direct results of why our sales and entertainment taxes have increased so dramatically was I gotta be careful about this, the construction of new stadiums, okay? And what I mean by that is, when the Metrodome was operating, the Twins and the Vikings the sales tax, the taxes on the tickets did not include entertainment taxes. And so when Target Field opened up, the Twins now are contributing towards the entertainment tax. When US Bank Stadium opened, the taxes from those tickets are also increasing. So we also had obviously costs associated with US Bank Stadium. So I'm just trying to give you a higher level. We're looking only at the revenue side, right? But that's one of the reasons why we've had significant increases. The other is, I would say, just generally and this is where we do have impact, the growth of residents downtown, and much of those sales taxes come from restaurants and liquor sales downtown. And so it's not just visitors, but it's also people living here who contribute to that, and that makes for overall, I think, a healthier economy globally, right, on a number of levels. So that's that's another significant factor that I think contributes to that. And the third would be, I think we are being seen, and certainly a number of people are having this effort, is it's not really the large events that draw that, like the Super Bowl, the Final Four, but we are being seen as a better place to come and visit and spend your money. And that is not just a downtown thing, that's overall for all wards that help contribute toward that reputational increase that I think is a factor in that. And that's one of the reasons we use it as a metric, is because that is the work that we do to support, as I said, our neighborhoods and our community planning economic development department.
Thank you. You mentioned this before, but you talked about, and I too have noticed that it seems like there's more interaction in our budget, in our city's budget. It's easier for people to pick out line items and come and ask us questions. What is your department's long-term plan to help increase either visits to that webpage or other efforts that you're doing in the name of financial transparency?
If you're okay with it, I'd ask Micah to address that particular issue.
Welcome, Director Intermill.
Sure. Madam Chair and members, Micah Intermill, the city's budget director. It's a good question, and I think I would point back to Mr. Ruff's initial comments that really our first goal is trust, and that trust only grows with transparency. So actually, it's appropriate that the city clerk is here as I answer this question, because he actually encouraged the development of a more robust budget website. And so we've really, as a department, focused on that as a tool to provide more transparency into decision making. And so we've done other things like put out informational videos about how city finances work, how the budget process works. We've done less emphasis on the financial transparency site proper, but I think when you look at that metric as a whole, the combined site visits are increasing. And so that's, I think it's good. It's good to have the reminder that we also need to be publicizing the financial transparency website, so we'll continue to do that. But I think people consume information differently, and so our goal is just to put out that information in multiple formats so that it can be accessed where people are.
Thank you. Did you want to mention the new software tools that you've been implementing? And because I think you agree that also will help. If you could just spend a minute on that.
Certainly, Madam Chair, thank you for the reminder. So, the City Council did appropriate funding for new budget software this year that we're deploying, have deployed, and are in the throes of working through new software and new business process. But that software is actually part of the larger suite of products that come from the same vendor as our financial transparency site. And so the company that built that software started in the area of financial transparency and has really built out a suite of tools that helps us as the budget office, the finance and property services department, help departments put out financial information that's, again, more transparent, more accessible, that is just consistent across whether you're seeing it in the budget book, on the website. We'll be able to link to link data sets live into our city website so that as budget decisions are made, we can show what that impact will be as, I think not this year, but we're looking to future years, be able to embed sort of budget to actual spending so that folks can see as we are going through the year, how are the resource allocation decisions that the council is making, how are those stacking up against the reality that departments are living and how they're spending those dollars.
Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues? I have one last one that I've asked the mayor, and it's more just for you, Mr. Ruff, to pontificate on a little bit. I'm curious what you see as the biggest potential for your department to support economic inclusion and how the council can support that effort. Maybe that's about target market stuff, but maybe it's about something else. And I just was curious what you think would help us move the needle as a city on economic inclusion in our city.
So I will use one specific example that I know many of you are aware of, and certainly Councilmember Warsame deserves a great deal of credit for, and that is on the Hiawatha expansion and the training facility that is proposed there. That I thought was, the council approved that vision in December of last year. That is a great marriage of a number of initiatives, not just in our department, but citywide, which is to think about when we have opportunities to make significant building investments around the city, that we not just think about the enterprise with the small e, but we think about how can we build facilities that support partnerships longer term. And the training facility specifically meaning that we can provide an opportunity for not just women and people of color come into our workforce, in our public works workforce, but that we can partner with trades and have a facility where the invitation is just down the street from many communities who historically have seen significant unemployment. So I don't know that that answers your question about how do we move the needle more globally, because clearly our procurement processes are how we spend our money, whom we bank with, are all important decisions. But I just use that as a recent example of a different way of thinking than maybe what we have in the past. And
thank you. I don't see any further questions. Thank you, Councilmember Warsame, for your careful stewardship through Ways and Means of this as the Home Committee Chair. I will move on to the next topic.
I should be remiss. I don't want to be remiss in saying that equal billing for the training center should go with Councilmember Reich. Significant part of overseeing public works, and I know certainly the other members here as well. So I don't want to. I obviously favor the committee chair and do everything I can to make him look good. You all know that, but I know that that's a shared effort as well among all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reich. Thanks for your time, Finance Department. Next up, we have the City Clerk's office, and they're just getting situated, loading their video. For those of my colleagues that have just arrived, this is all in your binder, though I want to point out that our city clerk has fairly recently delivered to all of our offices their annual report, which is the only bound report that we get every year. And I'm sure that our city clerk, who's so very quick on his feet for all of us and everything, would be happy to answer questions from either place. Mr. Carl, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as clerk for the City of Minneapolis. May it please the committee, I'm here to present our department's 2019 results report. But before I begin, I would appreciate the opportunity to introduce our department's management team. With me are Assistant City Clerks Grace Wacklerowitz, Christian Rummelhoff, and Jackie Hansen. Ms. Wacklerowitz leads the Elections Division. Mr. Rummelhoff leads the Records Division. Ms. Hansen leads the Legislative Division. And then rounding out our team are Grant Johnson, who leads our Innovation, Design, and Technology team, and our newest addition, Gina Powell, who leads our administration. The clerk's office has three primary business lines, as you know. These include elections and voter services, which maintains a state of readiness to conduct an election whenever required and also maximizes access to the ballot. Records and information management, which ensures the city's information assets are managed effectively to support the continuity of government operations in compliance with all applicable legal and regulatory mandates. And legislative support and administration, which supports the City Council in its core legislative and oversight functions, delivers a variety of delegated services, and also attends to the day-to-day administration of our department. From a budgetary perspective, the records and legislative divisions are consolidated into a single program budget. This is denoted on this slide as Office of City Clerk. In 2018, as you can see, these divisions accounted for approximately $5 million in 25 full-time positions. Our key performance metrics are shown here, along with some indicators for trends over prior years. The Elections Division is a separate program budget. In 2018, this division accounted for $2.8 million in 7 full-time positions. By separately accounting for this division, the city can better anticipate and track fluctuations from year to year, and that's very common to election offices across the nation because elections are heavily influenced by a variety of external factors outside of our control. For example, but not limited to, the type of election, the projected voter turnout, ballot content and competitiveness, political currents, and a multitude of other factors. This slide then reflects our office's performance against the enterprise policies or priorities that were identified by council. These pertain to workforce and spend diversity. The clerk's office is a small department. Over the past year, we've maintained several vacancies to offset some project costs, most notably tied to the ongoing development of our legislative information management system. However, we are in the process of filling the last of our vacancies now. During the past few years, we've also taken advantage when vacancies occur to shift positions between divisions in order to better balance workloads both within and across business lines. At a high level, an example of some of these shifts is that we have taken out of the legislative division and put positions into both the elections and records divisions. So when I came in 2010, for example, there were 4 full-time positions in the elections division. We've shifted 2 existing positions and added 1, thanks to the mayor and council, so that we now have a full-time team of 7 election administrators to serve the largest city and the top-ranked voter turnout state in the nation. In 2010, we had only 2 full-time people working in our records division and 4 people working in our document solutions center. Through a combination of mergers, internal transfers, and the addition of 1 position, we now have a team of 13 that includes information specialists, records managers, our small in-house technology unit, and production technicians. We also were able to repurpose 1 position to provide dedicated staffing for the council's reception desk. These personnel moves helped to address significant increases in demand, but it has, of course, reduced the office's capacity to address our central work in supporting the City Council through the legislative division. And as demonstrated by our performance metrics, it still has not provided the capacity and bandwidth to meet actual operating needs in any division of the department. As a consequence, to meet statutory and charter-imposed duties, the office has incurred, over time, hired contractors and temporary workers in each of our divisions to supplement our core team, and even temporarily reassigned personnel or even entire functions between divisions. Historically, the clerk's office has been led by women, and that remains true today. Approximately 52% of our workforce are women, and women hold the majority of the supervisory positions in our department. Of our 9 supervisory positions in the clerk's office, 5 are held by women, including 2 of 3 leadership posts as assistant city clerks who lead our core business lines. In terms of our employee base, we've been far less effective at attributing or attracting and retaining people of color. From my perspective, there are at least 2 factors that are at play here. First, and this is both a positive and a negative, the clerk's office has been fortunate to have many long-tenured employees. We have many employees who have been with the department for 25 years or more, with some who have been here for more than 30 years. With that lack of turnover, there is lack of opportunity to change the workforce. We do, however, benefit from a significant institutional memory and highly experienced workforce. When we have had vacancies also, we have not attracted a large number of candidates who present as people of color. In terms of our spend, which is also shown on this slide, the clerk's office doesn't have many department-specific contracts. Instead, we primarily take advantage and rely on enterprise contracts for the majority of our operating needs. Of the contracts that are initiated, managed, and maintained by the clerk's office, there are frequently specific requirements, often dictated by law, which limit the qualifying respondent pool. An example, we hold the city's contract for legal publications required by law. Currently, that contract is held by Finance and Commerce. To be designated an official legal publication, a newspaper must qualify by satisfying very specific statutory criteria. There are 9 factors. Everything from production rates, circulation periods, the volume of paid subscribers, to the balance of news content and paid advertising and more. So those statutory requirements would restrict the potential pool of eligible respondents to the contract when we let it out. An example where the clerk's office has been successful in this regard is with our legislative information management system, which was designed, built, and implemented in partnership with DataNet Systems Corporation. DataNet is a minority-owned and operated corporation. The next few slides then provide details about key performance measures for each of our office divisions. We begin with records and information management. Slides 4 and 5 focus on the volume of public data requests received and processed by our records division, shown on this chart on the left side, as compared to the number of requests that have been closed, shown on the right. Data is provided for the years 2015 through 2013. Right away, you can see that the volume of requests has grown significantly during that 4-year period, reflecting a total increase of 375%. It's important to point out that these numbers do not include any requests that involve police data. Those are handled by the police department, but they do require significant engagement by my records division. These numbers also do not include requests for data that might have been made directly to departments and resolved by those departments. That would include routine requests for otherwise known public data. What you do see here, however, is the combination of many factors. First, the effect of centralizing data request functions into the clerk's office. In prior years, the clerk's office merely acted as a switching station. We received the requests and we routed them to the departments for response. Since 2015, the clerk's office has taken on the central responsibility for receiving, routing, reviewing, redacting when necessary, and then releasing responsive public data to the majority of requests. And again, we partner with all departments in performing this statutorily mandated work. As shown here, we have been mostly successful at closing requests within the year. The response times here show that request response times can vary from as little as a few days to several months. There are quite a number of factors that can and do impact the timeliness of our responses. Internally, we have established the goal of closing data requests within 30 days. As shown here, in 2018, the majority of cases were closed within an average of 36. So we're just shy of hitting our target goal, but we are closer than 4 years ago when the majority of requests took an average of 41 days to close. In 2018, we saw increases primarily in 2 types of requests. First, there was a spike in the number of what we classify as transactional data requests. These are requests that consist entirely of data classified by law as being public and which are relatively simple to produce. But a significant increase in that type of request can still clog up the system and create backlogs given our limited capacity. To address this, the Records Division is and has been collaborating with the data analytics team in the Information Technology Department to identify and proactively publish this kind of routine data via the city's open data portal. The goal for us is to refer these requests for purely transactional data to the open data portal, thereby eliminating or at least significantly reducing the need for direct intervention by staff in the Records Division. At the same time, we've experienced increases in complex, multifaceted requests that involve responsive data from multiple departments, cover multiple years, and which often include multiple subjects. These requests almost always involve data that is presented in formats mixing both public and not public data, which further necessitates us to have a careful review to redact any non-public data before releasing the responses. These are what we would classify as managed data requests, because they require a project management approach in handling and resolving them. As you can reasonably expect then, managed requests consume significantly more resources and take time before the responsive data can be released. Much more detail about our request volume, our processing requirements, our timely response, and other matters are included in our 2018 annual report, which, as you noted, Madam Chair, was circulated to council members last week. It's also posted to the clerk's website for public access. The next 2 slides reflect performance data from the Legislative Support and Administration Division. This division has the broadest and the most diverse range of responsibilities in the department, but its core function is serving as the secretariat for the City Council and committees. Performance data shown on slides 6 and 7 are tied to that scope of work. And central to that work of this division is the production of meeting agendas. Agendas define issues for policymakers and for the communities that they represent. They help contextualize opportunities and risks. They summarize the implications of proposed alternatives, and they identify recommended courses of action or decisions that involve public assets and resources which can impact the rights and responsibilities of residents. This slide shows that a total of 2,744 individual agenda items were processed for 293 meetings planned and orchestrated in 2018 by the Secretariat team. That represents an 81% increase in the number of agenda items over just the past 3 years. The slide also shows that we support 17 decision-making bodies in 2018. It included the City Council and its 12 standing committees, the Independent Audit and Executive Committees, the Charter Commission, and the Ethical Practices Board. And beginning this year, we are taking on meeting management functions for the Board of Estimate and Taxation. This slide includes a chart that shows the total number of official acts that are produced each year over the past 3 years. In 2018, there were a total of 1,542 official acts. The city charter defines an official act as including each ordinance and every resolution enacted, as well as any other type of action that is taken, motions, directives, orders, judgments. This slide also demonstrates our very high commitment to accuracy. Last year, we had a 99.8% rate of accuracy in producing our official acts. That translates into only 2 errors. And to be clear, those errors, which are claimed by my office, reflect corrections that departments identified and brought forward after council action, but which still necessitated republication on our part in order to ensure 100% legal accuracy and sufficiency of the council's actions. Clear, complete, and timely production of agendas and official acts are critical to an accessible and transparent legislative process, one that contributes to informed, data-driven governance, which supports opportunities for meaningful public participation, and which builds and sustains community trust. Those outcomes underscore the importance of the accuracy and timeliness of our work in this unit. The final slides in my presentation reflect performance data for the Elections and Voter Services Division. Specifically, we're reporting here on voter turnout and demographic makeup of our election workforce. You'll recall Minneapolis set new turnout records in 2018 for a midterm election, and while that is a positive trend, it carries heavy burdens for one of the smallest units in the city. On the left side of this slide, you see turnout data covering elections from 2016 through 2018. That includes the primary and general elections for those 2 years, as well as there is data for the municipal general election in 2017 when we don't have a primary because of ranked choice voting. Absentee turnout is reflected in green in these columns, while the blue reflects election day turnout. Overall, you can see there is a slight increase in early voting. That includes voting by mail, early in person, and other options allowed under the umbrella of absentee balloting. But despite those increases that we've had for the convenience voting, the majority of voters in Minneapolis still prefer to cast their ballots at the polls on election day. These data have implications about the number of precincts and polling places that are needed to accommodate election day turnout, staffing for the polls, and how technology could be better leveraged to decrease time spent in line waiting to vote. Additionally, there are implications about how the city can continue to nudge voters to consider other options and advocate expanded convenience like true early voting. On the right side of the slide are data about the composition of our core of election judges. Here we are specifically focusing on self-reported data about the percentage of judges that identify as white and those that identify as being a person of color. In the 2018 gubernatorial general election, roughly 75% of election judges identified as white. That means that less than a fourth of our total number of election judges who responded identified with a different race or ethnicity. Also, it's important to note that this data is not validated, and that about 1/3 of the total number of our election judges do not answer our questions, so it's not complete data that we're providing here. These data are not entirely accurate, but anecdotally, it appears to be representative of the full workforce that we have. It is a large workforce, and remember that we employ anywhere between 1,500 and 2,500 judges, seasonal staffers, and temporary workers for each election. So it's a goal not only helping to make sure that our polls look like the communities that they're serving, but it also does connect with some of the city's other strategic goals around workforce training and jobs development. Finally, this slide reflects the total turnout for elections between 2016 and 2018 using the Citizen Voting Age Population Formula, also known as CVAP, CVAP. This is a method of measuring turnout based on an algorithm that attempts to identify those citizens who voted as well as the potential eligible pool of citizens who did not vote. So in this slide, we're showing the CVAP turnout for the 2016 and 2018 primaries and general elections, as well as the 2017 municipal general election. And as you can see, our highest turnout was in 2016, which was the last presidential election year. That's not surprising. We typically have the highest turnout in presidential elections. In 2016, Minneapolis achieved a 72.5% turnout as measured by the CVAP formula. That reflected a slight decrease, however, compared to the 2012 presidential election, when the city achieved approximately 77% turnout. As already noted, we achieved a 67.7% turnout last year for the 2018 gubernatorial election. It set new records for a midterm. In 2017, Minneapolis achieved 34.6% turnout, which is a very impressive score for a municipal-only odd-year election. The national average for municipal-only elections is about 15%. So we achieved double that score in an odd-year municipal-only election, something I think that we should take great pride in as a city. Clearly, Minneapolisans take voting very seriously. We've been fortunate to have policymakers who actively support our work to maximize access to the ballot for all voters. As an extension of that work, of course, we have extra challenges associated with the 2020 census and the subsequent redistricting that will be completed between 2021 and 2022. With that, Madam Chair, I've concluded my comments, and I'm happy to stand for questions the committee might have.
Thank you very much for this report. The Home Committee Chair in this case, Councilmember Ellison, is unable to be with us this afternoon. So I certainly avail all of my colleagues here to some comments and questions. Are there any right away? Otherwise, I'll take the first one. Mr. Carl, the clerk works with IT to put frequently requested transactional data on the open data portal. And I'm curious if, or rather how, you work with the analytics team to post the more complex information through dashboards online, since we know that the public tends to prefer analyzed data instead of raw data. So did you want to talk about that a little?
Madam Chair, the person in our office who has the best relationship with IT would be Christian Rummelhoff, the leader of the division that handles that work. So I would like to ask him to maybe respond to that question.
Terrific. Welcome, Mr. Rummelhoff.
Thank you. Madam Chair, council members, I'm Christian Rummelhoff. I'm the Assistant City Clerk, and I lead the Records and Information Management Division. As Mr. Carl indicated, we do have a great relationship with IT and with all the departments because they are critical partners in obtaining the data and making it available to requesters. So the data analytics team in particular has been extremely helpful to provide meaningful ways for the citizens to access data online. So we do partner with them, but also with departments. And many departments have their own initiatives to make more and more information available online. I think one of the ways we look at the trends in requests going upward, it's great that people are engaging with us to get more data. We'd like to see that number decrease, not because people are getting less data, but because we're making more data available proactively. And I think some great examples have happened over the last several years. The police stops dashboards. The police have been doing a great job on getting a lot of that information up in partnership with IT. The increasing amounts of information from regulatory services and business licensing are going up, and these are just helping stop requests from coming in because people are able to instantly get what they need. So we have a process where we're generally monitoring the types of requests that come in and identifying improvements to can we get that data to people faster or ideally proactively. And we meet every 2 weeks with the IT data analytics team to really drill down on how we can achieve this goal.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. So how do we reconcile that sort of theory that I believe in and intuitively it makes sense to me, and I love the transparency of the dashboards, that they will stop requests from coming in because people can find the information that they want, with the dramatic increase in requests coming in? It feels like we've been increasing our dashboard availability and all of the sort of accessibility of a lot of this data, and still seeing a huge number of requests.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Fletcher's point, I think to sort of frame it and then allow Mr. Rummelhoff, who works very closely with the team, I think in reconciling it, the question would be, we are putting more raw data sets through the open data portal, and our experience has shown that the majority of people are not necessarily choosing to go after raw data. When data is contextualized, when it is visualized, it makes sense to them. They can start to interpret and understand the data better, and so that's a fairly new effort on our part to start working to say, okay, take this raw data set and make it make sense for the public. For a layperson, what does that mean? How does it look like? Put it on a map, stretch that out, do comparisons. That's relatively new, and there are limited capacities both within IT and in the departments to visualize and contextualize the data. So as we get more experience, I think what we have found is that, for example, with the police stop data dashboard, more access, more hits to that site have occurred since that was created as a visualized set than before when it was simply raw data. So it's working with IT to go, okay, which of the data sets we have out there now are highly desirable, are asked for the most, and so we track regularly and meet with them. These are the data sets that are being requested most frequently. How can we, A, automate and proactively publish the data, and then is it something that makes sense as it is in raw data form, or would it make more sense if we're contextualized, and if so, can we prioritize that? So that's a high level. I don't know if you want to add any more.
The only thing I'd like to add, Madam Chair, Councilmember Fletcher, is that as we're providing more data and as people are able to get data faster, that's not necessarily going to decrease the amount of requests, because people will want even more data. And the more data there is, there's an endless kind of drive to have data that's available to conduct analysis, to do due diligence for business, for academics to use as they're studying how cities function. So I don't think that there's going to be a day when we're going to wake up to 0 requests. I think that the need for data will be ever growing.
My next question is about elections. I want to point out that we don't have any this year. We're going to have 3 elections next year, 3 of them. Turnout is continually growing, which is amazing. Thank you for everything you've done to contribute to that. How do you think, Mr. Carl, we can accommodate this increased demand from your department?
And here again, the expert would be our Director of Elections, Ms. Wachlerowitz, and as she comes up to offer her perspective, I would say at a high level, working with policymakers, we've been fortunate to add precincts, to subdivide, to find better locations. We've really promoted early voting as an option, which offsets then election day voting. We promoted convenience options, vote by mail, vote in person, and other forms that actually take the ballot to the people. As you know, we've engaged also in a lot of community outreach in terms of not just making the ballot accessible, but proactively reaching out to communities that historically have not been engaged or are underrepresented, finding people who can act as trusted ambassadors on our behalf to engage and bring the community out. And the more that we can engage and anticipate and address early voting as an option and encourage people to consider that as an option, a meaningful option, then the impact on election day is decreased.
I'd welcome up Ms. Wachlerowitz. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Grace Wachlerowitz. I'm the Assistant City Clerk, Director of Elections and Voter Services. Casey kind of stole my thunder. Everything that I was going to say is what the partnership is going to be critical. We are on a lot of different work groups to leverage it. We are currently leveraging outreach with our co-partners at NCR for 2020 census to leverage that. While the census is important, so is the upcoming election, so is the redistricting. So the more we can engage our sister departments, as well as the support from the City Council to get that information out, and also the civic literacy, why it is important to do these various functions, that will be one of our higher priorities for the upcoming years. Consistency and support in early voting will be critical in the oncoming years to support legislative change at the state level for true early voting, as Mr. Carl has said, Mr. Casey Carl has said, and also permanent or more flexibility in identifying where those early vote sites are well in advance so that we can strategically prepare staffing as well as the outreach of those locations for each of the election cycles.
Ms. Wilk-LaRoitz, if these things happen, the things that you just mentioned, and positive moving of the legislature to these measures that you discussed, do you anticipate continued increases in turnout, in election turnout?
It's always going to be variable based on the type of the election, how much activity is on the ballot as far as an open seat, if there's any active questions, et cetera. Those are out of our hands. What we can do is educate more of the population that doesn't see this as an important part of their life through civic literacy, and to be able to provide them with that information of why it's important and why to participate in this process. That will help increase the engagement, but we can never guarantee they will actually vote. But our consistent engagement so far has increased. And, it's our core program. Thank you. We are in the process of expanding and promoting our core program, which is the charitable organization for election recruitment. We are considering other venues in which we can generate that voter outreach through perhaps through grants, for example, of leveraging those in the community to help understand and educate because they're already in the community. It also will help fundraise and support organizations in general.
This ties into some of the efforts that I know have been happening over time in the clerk's office, and I'm hoping you could speak to them. What resources have been required so that the clerk's office can diversify our election judge pool, and has the return on investment matched your expectations?
Our nationally awarded student election program is the best example of our diversification. The ability to have a part-time SEJ coordinator to help facilitate that and leverage our schools as well as other nonprofits has dramatically increased our diversification in our core pool.
Any questions from my colleagues? None. The last question I have goes back to data requests. The number of formal records requests has increased significantly, as you pointed out. And I get that ideally we would see a decrease in that when people feel comfortable with the amount of information online, but what's the optimal staffing level, I wonder? And this is something that we've heard at listening sessions even this last week, and that was more about police records requests, but I think it's an important conversation to have, is what is the optimal staffing level? How do you continue to meet these standards and these turnaround times without increasing the staff? Mr. Carl.
I'm going to ask Mr. Omahoff to address that. I have an overhead that I can put up here that I think graphically shows, as I mentioned in my comments, it's been very difficult for us. We do not have the adequate permanent resources, and we have experienced, or we've been experimenting the past year or so with a number of contractors, hiring very specialized people with legal backgrounds who are helping with document review, redaction, and preparation processes. But it's very difficult to attract these temporary workers. It's very hard to keep them. We've had turnover. We're in the middle of getting new systems on board. There are learning curves with those systems, and so one of the things we've tried to do is, rather than simply ask for positions, is to think more long-term about what would be that appropriate number. So using these contractors to find out how many documents can we review on average, what's the backlog, how long does it take, both between transactional requests and managed requests, so that we can come forward in the future with a more realistic number about, we think this is the kind of permanent arrangement we would need. I mentioned in my comments too that although our data in our report didn't reflect police data requests, we meet with them routinely. I think it's every other week. We meet with the police department. We meet every other week with the communications department to handle media requests. We meet every other week with the IT analytics department. So a lot of meetings across the enterprise to make sure that we're doing our best. But the team that Mr. Romohoff has is 3 people, one of which is currently vacant but under recruitment, and 3 people to handle an organization of 22 departments, 4,000 employees, and the number of data requests we get is a stretch. Is that good enough? That might be good enough.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions in queue, so I'll say thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody.
Clerk's Office, for joining us today. Mr. Smith, I am unsure, there's been some flux of having Reg Services next or the Audit Committee next. Thank you. Councilmember Goodman has been able to join us, so whichever of you wishes to go next would work well. I am only seeing Director Bigby in the room, so I'm going to turn it over to her and ask that you go find our Reg Services team. I do want to point out to my colleagues that after today, we'll be halfway through all of these metrics. We'll have done 11 departments, and we'll have 11 more to do. So while that will include a couple of big ones, we're well on our way here, and I really appreciate your involvement. Director Bigby, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, committee members. I'm Ginger Bigby, Director of the Internal Audit Department, and I will go through our results for you. This is our first results report. So our first page looks great. We're all in the green, but we're only comparing to one prior year. And we started with, I believe, 2 FTE in 2017 and built up to 4 in 2018. So we're 4 now. Our performance summary, we are trying to report right now by counting the number of audits and consultations completed. That's not necessarily measuring the value that we add, so we're trying to think of new and innovative ways to report value add in our next report. For now, our number of completed audits and consultations have increased nearly 50% from 2017 to 2018, and that's just due, I think, to the size of staff. We've identified new audit issues because of the additional audits that we've completed. We've increased our investigative events, and I think that this is really key, having capacity on staff to follow up when we have fraud tips. I'd say 75 to 80% of our complaints are HR related. However, they often include a fraud allegation. And we definitely need capacity in the city to follow up on those fraud allegations, to identify and detect fraud, follow up on fraud, and then do the internal control review. So that's what the Internal Audit Department is doing now, is participating in some fraud investigations, and most importantly, I think, following up on the control environment. So if you have, for example, if funds are misappropriated, we want to make sure that however that opportunity enabled that event to happen, that we prevent that from happening again. Our workforce diversity, we don't show the numbers because we have less than 5, but we are currently achieving all diversity measures, gender and racial diversity on our team. We had 41% people of color and 45% women in 2018, but we have exceeded that in 2019. Spending with diverse suppliers. Our key IT consultant is a minority-owned business, but they do not have gender diversity. And that has been the same consultant for 4 years. Our contract for IT and cybersecurity audits exceeds the $175,000 for the target market program. However, the target market program members are invited to bid. So we did an RFP this year for new IT and cybersecurity consultants, but none of the target market applied. And I assume because they're not large enough to have the capacity to handle the city's IT and cybersecurity audits. We did have a number of large companies and small companies apply, so we decided to choose a pool of vendors. So we did choose a small, diverse vendor and a large vendor for our IT and cybersecurity audit services. I think we also think it's important, often large companies are not diverse in the ownership, but we look for the team that's assigned to the city. Are they giving us a diverse team to work with? So we look for gender and racial diversity on the team that is assigned to us. Our department priorities. Our top priority is to execute the audit plan, and the audit committee approves audits and consultations based on an enterprise risk assessment. Audits are primarily risk-based, and we look for ways to add value. So it might be identifying missed opportunities, allocating resources effectively, and of course making sure controls are designed well and that they're operating effectively. Another key priority is consultations. Consultations may be a suggestion from internal audit to help management with a process that's under development or a policy that's under development. So we don't make management decisions, we don't draft policies, we don't draft frameworks, but we add value in pulling in outside resources and identifying risks. So management may be developing a system, and maybe they haven't designed segregation of duties for that system. So it's more efficient if we identify those shortcomings up front and management has a chance to fix it before they implement the system. So that's a value add for consultations. Often management will ask us for a consultation, or the city council may suggest one. And it could be for any number of programs or initiatives that are under development. So right now we're engaged in one with MPD and HR that is equity and police recruiting. And it's just been a wonderful experience bringing diverse stakeholders together and identifying problems and coming up with some solutions. So spoiler alert, you can tune into the June 10th audit committee and see the results of that consultation. Issue follow-up is really key. The internal audit department has always followed up to some extent on issues, but now we're putting more structure around that. We're making sure that we comply with professional standards, and we're measuring and tracking it. What's the point of identifying audit issues if we don't follow up and make sure that management has sufficiently remediated those issues? So the number of issues is not as significant as the risk that the issue identified and that risk has been mitigated. If an issue is overdue, right now there are no overdue issues. If an issue is overdue, we present that to the audit committee and we state the name of the audit report, what issue it is, and what department is responsible for that. When we first started tracking, we had a number of overdue issues, and by the next audit committee, we had 0 overdue issues. So I think that helps management place the appropriate priority on closing those issues. Finally, a key priority for us is investigations, as I discussed. This diagram illustrates the fraud triangle, and when we review the internal control environment, when a fraud has happened, we're removing opportunity if we can fix that control. So it's either redesigning the control, making some tweaks to it, or perhaps the control didn't even exist, and we make suggestions to management, and then management has to design and implement an appropriate control. Right now, I'm informally tracking investigations in our internal audit work. We're looking at an enterprise case management solution where we can track, along with ethics violations, perhaps include fraud investigations. So we haven't come up with a solution yet, but we're working on it. This slide illustrates the number of audits that were completed. So in 2017, we had 5 completed audits, and in 2018, we had 9. The main difference was adding to the staff, so we now have 4 FTE. This slide illustrates the number of issues followed up. Again, I don't place too much importance on the number of issues. To me, an audit report with 10 low-risk issues is not as effective as an audit report with 1 issue where you're really getting to the root cause of the problem and you've identified the key risk. So I think a better measure is how many issues are open, or more importantly, how many are overdue. I also wanted to mention, we work with management if there are overdue issues. If management just hasn't prioritized it, the issue will still remain, will be reported as overdue. If management, and this recently happened with an IT issue, if management is remediating it but needs assistance from a vendor and it's running a little long, maybe they need another month, then we can extend the due date 30 days or 60 days, whatever is needed. This is a metric that we just created. It shows the number of investigations that had some internal control follow-up in 2017, and then in 2018, we make that a priority. When we participate in fraud investigation, internal control follow-up is required. So it should be even on the next report. The number of investigations should equal the number of internal control follow-up events. We're also looking at better ways that we can express the level of risk to the audit committee. So just saying how many issues are still open and whether they're low, moderate, or high gives you some of the picture, but we're thinking of ways that maybe we can use a heat map and show what risk level that department has on overall, and then how many open issues that entire department has, and I think that would give us a better picture of risk overall. We're also looking at trying to make our risk assessment process more data-driven. So risk assessments generally rely on management feedback, data from past audits, open audit issues, city council and mayor feedback. But now there are other data points that we can collect and start using data to enhance our risk assessment process. And our risk assessment process is now a rolling plan where we can account for emerging risks as things happen, things hit the media, we can account for that, ensure that that department, that we have audit coverage sufficient to mitigate risks in that area. Okay, that concludes our results, our first results Minneapolis report. Are there any questions?
Well, I want to thank you for involving this department in this process. It's an important one. I don't see any questions or comments in queue. I do chair your home committee, Director Bigby, so I will just go ahead and start. In terms of audits and investigations, we see a lot of increased audits and investigations from one year to the other here, even despite the department having a fair amount of employee turnover. So can you help us appreciate what internal audit has done to maintain this high standard, given there has been a little bit of FTE instability over time?
Mm-hmm. Chair Palmisano, committee members, I think the primary process to ensure ongoing quality is to comply with professional standards. So we leveraged the processes that were already in place, and then we identified gaps where we were not following or complying with professional standards and have implemented those processes. Professional standards require periodic peer review, and you have to have been following the standards for a time in order to pass peer review. So later this year, we're going to do a self-assessment for compliance with those standards, and then we'll remediate any gaps that we identify. And then next year, we hope to have our first peer review. We also participate in some fraud investigations, and we're interested in assessing internal controls relevant to all fraud investigations to ensure any control gaps and weaknesses are corrected. I think one way to ensure quality over time is always assessing the control environment after we identify issues, whatever type of audit engagement we're working on. What else do I want to mention? We're also looking at slowly adding FTE over time. So I think to build stability in the department, we don't want to just ask for a lot of additional FTE all at once. So we're balancing adding FTE with having a pool of vendors that have more capacity to support our complex work. We hope that we have done this in our current RFP. So we're going to slowly add FTE over time. Get a feel for how that's working out and how we're able to source our additional positions as the economy changes over time. and having a pool of vendors will ensure that we can always reach out for assistance when we need it. I also wanted to mention that over time, this department's been up and running again, I think since 2010. So we've had just a steady number of separations, one in 2011, one in 2013, one in 2014, one in 2015, 0 in 2016, 2 in 2017, 1 in 2018, 1 in 2019. That probably will continue over time. I think that's how it's averaging out. So I think having that pool of vendors that have quality and capacity will help us fill needs over time.
Thank you. I do want to point out that the outcomes of audits and the tracking and the way that you have expanded our tracking models in ways that the audit committee can see and appreciate, I think it has led to more compliance with people closing issues, and it's certainly led to an increased ability on our side on audit to be able to have visibility into the work being done. So thank you very much for that. I don't see any further questions, so we'll move on to our next department. Thanks for your time. Next, we have Reg Services. Welcome. And this is our last department for the day, so. Ms. Keller, just go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. As I work through the report, I am planning to address a number of the questions that came to our department via the coordinator's office analysis or through this body as I go. I'm also answering any questions that I think may arise from the performance summary. And if I miss anything at the end, please do. I'll be able to stand for questions. I've also been asked to direct your attention to the supplemental sheets that you received, which replaced the performance summary in the printed materials. There were just a couple of the color coding that changed between them.
Yeah, that's right. The stoplight sheet, colleagues, there's a new one that replaces the one in the binder. And then, Ms. Keller, do I understand that right, that you prefer we save questions for the end of your presentation?
Councilmember Palmisano, I'm happy to take questions as they arise, if that makes sense, or to wait.
Sure, we'll just see how it goes.
That's good. Though the department's composition does not yet meet the city's goal of 41% people of color, we have made significant strides on this metric, rising from 20% in 2009 to 36% in 2018. During the same period, our female participation in the department has dropped slightly from 49% to 46%. We prioritize workforce diversity and making sure that regulatory services is a department where people feel included and welcomed. We do this in a couple of ways. Through prioritizing our hiring and promoting, we look at our eligibility criteria to make sure that we are not inadvertently screening people out. We make sure we have diverse hiring panels for every position that is posted, and we are reviewing questions through a lens of implicit bias. While hiring is important, retention is equally so. And one of the most important retention strategies that we have is our equity and inclusion team, which is an extremely active team in the department and in the city. I rely on it deeply. This team hosts events. They participate in internal policy development, such as cultural agility development plans for every employee in the department, and they create a safe place for employees to come and discuss what's happening and to process. We are meeting our diverse supplier goals with both minority-owned businesses and women-owned suppliers. We are strategizing our strategies to prioritize our diverse spending while we work within the target market program and purchasing rules. We have also been really lucky in having diverse suppliers who are our largest contracts that are also bidding lower. And so this is something where the measures look really good, and it's something that could change in the future should those bids change. Our current largest diverse suppliers are our nuisance abatement contractor and a private veterinarian that we contract with, veterinarian services we contract with. Moving on to department priorities, one of the things we've been asked to do as part of the budget and as part of results reporting is to consider things that we should either stop doing or adjust how we do them. And our analysis of abandoned vehicles suggests that it falls into this category, which is why I'm bringing it forward to this report today. As it takes a few metrics to really understand how this process works. So before we walk through the slide, though, I want to clarify which vehicles are included in the analysis. These are not inoperable vehicles, nor are they vehicles that are parked illegally or considered to be a safety hazard. These are vehicles that have simply been parked legally but on the street for too long. As you can see from the flowchart at the top of the slide, each abandoned vehicle has the potential for 4 touch points with the city, beginning with a 311 call and ultimately culminating with a ticket and a tow. The entire process takes at least 3 days from start to finish and often takes much longer. The middle chart there shows the complaint outcomes over time, and you can see that overall the complaints have almost doubled in the last 5 years. Currently, they make up about 50% of all of the complaints that come into traffic control. The blue bar shows that many of these vehicles are moved between when the complaint is entered into 311 and when our agent shows up on the scene to validate it. The vast majority are moved by the second visit, and only 15.4% of the initial complaints received a ticket and a tow in 2018. While there are Moving down to the lower left there, you can see that while there are more complaints in various parts of the city, the overall proportion that actually receive that final ticket and tow is consistent across our geography. The bottom right chart brings us to our financial return on these complaints. It's actually so low that I continue to tell our analysts this can't be right. We have found that Minneapolis' portion of the total tickets issued in 2018 was about $42,000. And once we subtracted the percentage that are never recovered or are dismissed by their court, we calculate the value to be around $8,500. All of this occurs within a context of rising pressures on traffic control as an organization. Parking violation complaints have also nearly doubled in the past 5 years, and hours in the field have grown by 57% in the same period. So the department is exploring changing our practice of considering vehicles abandoned after 72 hours and studying alternate policy recommendations and their impacts, both intended and potentially unintended impacts of this. And we're at the beginning stages of this work, but I wanted to introduce you to it.
I want to pause and give the floor to Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a shout out to Ward 4, keeping consistent with the highest. We also have the largest amount of 311 calls. So I was just curious because you had mentioned a study around the 72-hour component. I know it's just starting, but do you have a timeline of when that will be completed and when policy recommendations will be brought forward?
Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I'm afraid I don't have that timeline for you here. We're intermixing it among all of the other policy work that we're doing as a department. Part of introducing it also was to see what the policy appetite was for this work to happen.
And thank you, Madam Chair, if I can ask a follow-up. So I'm curious also, how do commercial vehicles fit into this, including semis that have been parked for longer than 72 hours? Is that calculated into this, or are these just personal vehicles?
No, they are calculated into this. Okay. Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, they are currently in this analysis. I understand that there are different pressure points with commercial vehicles, and so any policy analysis that we do would be sure to isolate and identify those implications.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. First of all, thank you for this, because I think it is one of the hopes of this results process that we'll see presentations on things that aren't working the way we want them to be, as well as things that are. I think it's very challenging to get up and present and trust that we'll have a constructive conversation, and just know that I really appreciate identifying this as something that we want to change. As we think about it, I'm a little surprised to see Ward 3's numbers so low, and I think it's partially that we've probably stopped calling on. There's kind of a phenomenon in Marcy Holmes especially, where students who drive in from out of town or further out in the state park on a Monday morning, and our process of identifying this means that it's pretty safe for them to abandon their vehicle till Friday afternoon, and we won't have gotten to them by the time we call about them on Wednesday and then wait the 72 hours. And so there's a set of driving behaviors that if a revised policy can start to impact the way people are using parking, I think that would be a welcome change. So please keep in touch as that progresses.
Yes, thank you. That was very courageous, Director, and it's the kind of conversation we're looking to have here, so.
Thank you. A priority area in 2018 that continues to build in 2019 is a people-centered approach to residential inspections. While all staff are expected to recognize the inherent dignity and people and that their enforcement actions have very real impacts on residents, the department has 2 programs that dive more deeply into complex and nuanced situations. We will talk some about the homeowner navigation program's programmatic results later in the presentation, but I also wanted to include it here as part of an overall mentality shift. The program began after the department realized that vulnerable homeowners were sometimes literally being cited out of their homes. Housing Navigation Program, or HNP as we refer to it, preserves housing stability by pairing vulnerable homeowners who are having difficulty addressing housing orders with a staff person who can build relationships and trust. So in 2017 and 2018, 42% of the cases that they worked supported senior citizens, 31% of them assisted the disabled. Working with veterans and residents with extremely low incomes were 2 other groups that the team collected information on or connected to resources. And then new in 2018, late 2018, the program began collecting demographic information on their participants, so we will be able to understand other socioeconomic and demographic trends in the residents that they serve. In 2018, the department also created tenant navigator roles in both housing and fire inspections to address complex situations involving renters. Brought in whenever the city is taking an action that could impact the renter's housing stability, or if the renter has indicated a fear of retaliation, the tenant navigators engage directly with the resident and then the property owner in order to understand and help resolve the situation. As you can read in the case study that's included there, the cases can also involve connecting the resident with legal services. With staff in the roles beginning mid-quarter 2018, we are already seeing results with more than 30 cases impacted. Comprehensive tracking systems are being built for both of these programs so that we can better understand who we are serving and whether we're meeting our goals of increasing housing stability and livability. So we're looking at tracking things like which inspectors are utilizing these services, since these are both referral programs, where cases are located geographically, demographics of the renter or the property owner, whether tenant navigator cases cluster by property owner, and case outcomes. The impacts of both programs extend beyond these individual cases. These staff have appeared on cultural radio shows and answered live calls. They attend community meetings, and they have built and are continuing to build networks within the community, identifying gaps in coverage and creating innovative partnerships to fill them. So to transition out of our priority slides and into the budget program areas, we'll start with housing inspection services. As you can see in the chart on the left, the number of 311 complaints has decreased from 2017, driven by a decrease in our exterior nuisance complaints. On the right chart, you can see that the percent of the 311 complaints that were resolved within the service level has dropped in many of the cases. When ELMS rolled out in late 2016, there was a change in the point in the process when an ELMS case was closed in the system, but no change in the accompanying SLA. This was a misstep that the city made. So prior to the system launch, 311 complaints were closed as soon as the inspector either founded the violation or found that there was no violation. And now they stay open until the case is closed, the entire case is closed. Occasionally, or sometimes, this can go all the way through an appeal. So we tried to correct a number of, you'll see in both housing and fires SLAs last fall, but because of an anticipated large system upgrade to Elms, that work was put on hold. That upgrade has happened this month. Happy to report, and I hope to have movement on this process soon so that we can get these back into alignment. Looking at our strategic inspections group, shown in red, these cases are often our most complex and typically take the longest to resolve. And again, in tracking the SLA response rate, there is a disconnect between the current SLA of 3 days and the workflow and priorities of that group. Our overall number of housing inspections has increased from 2017 due in large part to a substantial increase in rental licensing inspections. In 2017, we performed just over 1,900 rental licensing inspections with this group, and in 2018, it was over 7,000. Rental licensing cases are the most complicated to perform and to enter in our system, which takes quite a bit of time and resources. In 2017, as inspectors were learning the system, there was a disproportionate focus then on nuisance inspections. This changed in 2018 and is carrying forward in 2019. Looking at the chart on the right, we draw two insights from the overall number of housing code violations that were found. First, we can see that the increase in rental licensing inspections resulted in an accompanying increase in interior and exterior violations. This would make sense. Second, there was also a small in magnitude but significant in scale increase of miscellaneous violations. This segment is where the short-term rental violations would show up, are categorized, and that was approximately 300. The number of buildings in our vacant building registration program continues to decline, likely tied to a strong housing market. When a property comes onto the vacant building registration, we refer to it as VBR, the VBR list, or the ownership of that property changes, staff proactively engage with the owners to make sure they understand the impacts of being part of the program and the ways, such as through a restoration agreement, that we can help them to bring the property back into code compliance and back onto the housing market. So restoration agreements are contracts between the department and the property owner where we suspend their fee for a period of 6 months to provide them time to rehabilitate the program. And if the conditions on the restoration agreement are met, the fee is permanently waived. Restoration agreements are attractive options for real estate investors who may not have the capital to pay both our fee and complete the repairs. There are other investors, however, for whom this option isn't as attractive. Perhaps the fee has been paid as part of their closing costs, or they just simply have the resources to do both. The city's vacant building ordinance does not limit the duration of time that a property can be on the list. And as it's privately owned property, if the property owner is maintaining the building and is paying the taxes, we cannot compel them to rehabilitate or sell the property. Though both the number of properties and restoration agreements are trending downward, there were only 3% fewer restoration agreements in 2018 compared to 2017, and we attribute this both to properties moving more quickly off the list with a strong housing market and having alternate tools as well. So a property owner may decide that Hennepin County's 5-week redemption program is a better option for them as we are highlighting additional options for property owners. They are accepting different options. One important piece on the second chart that I especially notice is the blue line, and you can see that the average length of time in the program has dropped from in 2014 at 30 months, but even between 2017 and 2018, from 22 down to 17 months. And these are 5 months that are reclaimed back into the housing market per average property. Our focus is on properties that have been on the list the longest, and I believe that our greatest opportunity may lie with those that are owned by either the city or the county, as there are a number of them that have been on for a very long time. We are working with both CPED and with the county on policy options around these. Moving on to traffic control. The number of parking and abandoned vehicle complaints have nearly doubled in the last 5 years, with an average 13.5% jump between 2017 and 2018. As I mentioned in our focus on abandoned vehicles earlier, this trend has continued to, is expected to continue rather in 2019. And while the number of complaints and calls has risen drastically, we've not seen a significant drop in our SLAs. Such as in housing inspections, there is an SLA story here as well, although it's a different one. The SLAs for these calls were set more than a decade ago when the process was paper and agents needed to drive back to pick up their complaints. Our official SLAs range from 5 to 14 days, but they do not match our internal goals. For instance, our goal is to respond to all parking complaints within 24 hours and urgent ones within 1 hour, whereas the SLA for these is 5 days. Were we to measure our internal goals instead, the percentage resolved falls to 81% for non-urgent complaints and to 58% for urgent complaints. And if I were you, I would expect to see these SLAs updated for next year. In work hours by activity, the total hours are comparable to previous years. Within the years, you will see some variability, most notably for 2018 is the Super Bowl, which increased special event hours by about 1,600. We see a similar story in the number of tickets issued. Results for both of these measures are not only a function of the work available, but also of how we prioritize the division's work. Increased attention to traffic flow, especially for special events, for example, impacts availability of staff to educate and enforce in the rest of the city. Late in 2017, moving on to the right-hand side of the page here, late in 2017, the department began offering warnings in specific situations in lieu of parking tickets. Warnings can be issued for any violation that is not a significant safety violation. And examples of situations where we've used warnings include educating students during the first week of school, implementation of a new critical parking area, any kind of snow-covered boundaries, or missing parking signs. And as we collect more longitudinal data on the warnings and how we practice them, we'll evaluate the effectiveness in educating drivers and preventing future citations. Animal care and control has two main arms to its operations, the shelter work and the field operations. The first measure on page 13 shows our shelter outcomes. Though there was a drop in intake in 2018 when compared to 2017, you'll note that both quantities are still within the normal trend bounds. Every year, MAC handles dogs and cats that have been surrendered, recovered, seized, or taken in as evidence in a criminal case. In 2018, for instance, at least 350 of the animals shown on this chart were confiscated due to illegal activity. An additional 623 wildlife and 122 other animals, such as chickens, goats, and rabbits, entered the shelter and are not captured in this data. Veterinarians evaluate all of these animals to determine whether they can be adopted or what appropriate placement would be. All dogs, cats, and other pets in MAC's custody that are healthy and safe are offered to the general public for adoption. Those with behavioral or medical issues that are treatable are offered to rescue partners, including no-kill shelters, so that they can find appropriate new homes. Animals determined to be a public safety hazard, or those that are ill or injured to the point that a veterinarian recommends euthanasia to prevent pain and suffering, are not offered to the public for placement. Additionally, many Minneapolis residents know that MAC is a safe place to bring their beloved pets when they can no longer care for them. Of the euthanasia performed in 2018, almost half, 48%, was performed on pets that were surrendered by their owners. If owners surrendered euthanasia and animals who died in the shelter are removed from the shelter outcome categories, which we are finding is the practice of our peers, MAC's 2018 euthanasia rate falls from 25% to 19%. Dangerous animals, moving to the right-hand side of the page here, dangerous animals are an important link between MAC's shelter and the field. The division has a strong protocol for determining whether dogs which have bitten or demonstrated aggression should be designated as dangerous or potentially dangerous. We also have a very strong protocol for once that designation is made and what kind of standards the owners need to have or keep in order to house those animals and make sure that the animals are safe and that the public is safe. If you add together the three numbers on the funnel chart on the right, you'll see the total number of dogs that bit over the course of 5 years. It's 1,227 in total. Of that total, only 13% were declared dangerous, and due to the high standards we set for owners of an animal that has been declared, less than half of 1%, or 6 dogs, bit again.
If I could pause and turn it over to Council Member Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ms. Keller. I'm curious, is there relationship with DNR? We've been seeing I think an increase in wild animals, wild turkeys on the freeway and neighborhoods, raccoons, other wild animals in the city. And what's the relationship with DNR, or is there a plan or a process in animal control to deal with those types of situations?
Through the chair, Councilmember Jenkins, I will answer and then invite Caroline Harefield to respond if there is something more complete that needs to be said. We do have a relationship with DNR. We routinely would refer animals to them and refer callers to the DNR as well. Should there be an incident reported, MAC often gets calls about these animals and requests to come and handle them and refer those to the DNR. Is it? Anything else, or is that?
Thank you, council members. MAC does have a good relationship with the DNR, but our primary responsibility is for domestic animals, whereas theirs is for wildlife. And a lot of the wildlife we actually don't have authority to handle unless they're sick or injured. So MAC will, because of the public safety threat, handle all the sick and injured wildlife. But as far as wildlife is living in the city, they just live here, and they adapt very well to the city. We do advise people on how to avoid contact with wildlife, like don't allow your trash to sit out, your dirty grills to sit out that will attract wildlife basically to the free buffet. But we have to learn to cohabitate with wildlife because they're already here. The DNR actually are the regulators of wildlife. So we only handle the sick or injured to protect public safety and health at MAC. But we do work closely with the DNR.
All right. Yeah. No, thank you. Just to follow up. I mean, I just know that many times, these animals create traffic concerns, safety issues for different communities, and then we have to somehow manage that.
Right. And we do, if there's a serious public safety risk, we will assist. But the DNR are the agency that's tasked with, like, for example, the turkeys are actually federally protected. So we couldn't just go in and remove a perfectly healthy turkey from a community. That's something the DNR would have to do.
Okay.
Specifically, I know that was a big issue
Sure.
a few months ago.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cunningham?
I'm actually going to defer to Councilmember Goodman because it seems as though she is.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that you can always contact the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, which does most of the wildlife issues. I mean, we don't want the public calling us because their dog dug up a den of bunnies, and then we're like getting the bunnies, like we could do something about that. But someone can do something about that. It's the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The DNR probably isn't going to just come and remove animals, and when they do, the outcome is usually not good. So if there's a deer, and I have a lot of that problem, crossing the street to eat somebody's tulips, they're not going to come and capture the deer and move it to a place where it might not come back to. Let's just say that. The outcome is going to be one that the neighbors hate even more. So I just want to point that out. The Humane Society, by the way, also does not intake bunnies or squirrels or turkeys or any other kind of wildlife. They also only work with domestic animals.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two questions, or actually three. So the first is to get clarification, as you were saying around euthanasia, is it that owners are bringing their pets in to be euthanized? Just to make sure I'm understanding that clearly.
Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, we do have a number of owners who bring in their pets to be euthanized because it is expensive to do, and that this is a public service that we can provide. Additionally, we have owners who bring in pets who are just very ill, and they may not directly request euthanasia. The evaluation from our veterinarian says that that is the most appropriate and humane course to take.
Great, thank you. And I was just curious, within determining animals, particularly dogs, that are considered a threat to public safety, what is the criteria for that in order for them to then qualify to be euthanized?
Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, so there are a couple of different ways that the situation can play out. If an animal has bitten and is going to be declared dangerous or potentially dangerous, the process follows designations that are laid out by the state. So the state actually defines what those terms mean. So the animals are reviewed, they'll have a report of the aggressive incident or the bite that occurred, and additionally, previous known issues with the animal will be reviewed. We don't look at how the animal acts in the shelter because we know that most dogs are fearful in the shelter and they're stressed in that setting, and it's also not indicative, has nothing to do with the incident that occurred. It's separate from that. If an animal is declared, that does not mean that it is euthanized. That means that the owner then has the opportunity to put protocols in place in their home and make an agreement with MAC as to, or maybe not make an agreement, but adhere to the standards that MAC sets in how to properly house that animal so that it is not a danger to itself or to others.
Thank you for that. I also am curious around animal abuse investigations. Does that falls within this area, if I'm not mistaken? Because I did a ride along, and I recommend my colleagues do a ride along with animal care and control. So I was just curious, investigations, do they fall within this this purview as well?
Councilmember Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, yes, both animal abuse investigations would fall in here as well as criminal investigations that involve animals, and these are tying animals to human crimes.
Great. I just wanted to bring that to folks' attention because typically research has shown that if there's animal cruelty and abuse that's happening, it's often connected to other crimes that are happening. And so, so having a really strong investigations unit within this division is really key around public safety. And then the last piece I want to just raise and praise the domestic violence program that's in the MAC. Could you speak a little bit more to that, and then how that's been utilized during its pilot phase?
Certainly, Chair Palmisano, Councilor Cunningham, this is a program which is beloved within the department as well. So if there is a victim of domestic violence who has a pet and feels like they cannot relocate themselves or move themselves out of the situation because they don't want to leave this animal behind, because we know that pets are not allowed into shelters, we will take that animal and we will house that animal for a period of time until the more permanent situation can be put in place for that family.
Thank you so much. And shout out, I just adopted a pit bull from the MAC, and she was actually there for 4 weeks, which is kind of a long time. And Diamond, anybody? Yes. And so her name is Minnie now. So, folks were like, she's unruly, you know, like that was kind of the story that came in, and like she's a big old baby, 50-pound baby, but I'm so grateful to, my husband and I are grateful to have her as addition to our family. So I recommend folks, if you're feeling like you want to add to your family, stop by the MAC. Thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you. So moving on to 311 complaints within MAC, you'll see that there's a sizable drop in livability calls in 2018. This is attributed to a contract that the department put in place with an outside vendor to clean up deceased wildlife. MAC continues to respond to requests for dogs and cats who have been hit by a car or have otherwise died. Additionally, MAC receives thousands of calls directly each year, which are not routed through 311. In 2018, that totaled 5,762. The division continues to meet its 311 SLA goals, which are 11 days for livability complaints such as barking, loose dogs, permits or licenses, and 4 days for public health complaints, sick or injured animals, and exotic animals. And like other regulatory services divisions, MAC is reviewing its SLAs against its current business practices and internal goals to ensure that the numbers are reflective of the expectations that the public has for us and that we have of ourselves. For fire inspection services, the number of 311 complaints is down from 2017, following a downward trend since 2014 when complaints for high occupancy and commercial properties peaked. This trend correlates with the beginning of tiered rental licensing, where the inspection cycle is tied to the tier of the building. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll see that our percent of 311 complaints resolved within the service level agreement. As with housing, when ELMS rolled out, there was a change in the point of the process when the 311 complaint was closed, but no change in the SLA itself. And now that the ELMS upgrade is completed, I'm looking forward to making progress on that. Additionally, the division has completed cross-training with staff to conduct residential, commercial, and mixed-use building inspections so that one staff can do both. We don't have to send 2 people out, especially for mixed-use buildings. And it's coupled with adding an additional inspector to focus on complaints. Both of those things we believe help to drive up our SLA response rate. A number of factors combined in 2018 to produce the 7,800 inspections conducted by fire inspections, including a bounce back from the initial launch of ELMS, increased staff capacity with 2 additional fire inspectors added, and that's cross-training that I mentioned for commercial and high occupancy residential. Starting in 2017, FIS refocused its inspection efforts toward residential and mixed-use structures rather than commercial structures, with special emphasis in 2018 on rental licensing inspections. All of these changes have brought us a better understanding of the conditions of high occupancy residential buildings and provided important opportunities to connect with renters and get upstream of 311 complaints. As we might expect, moving on to the right-hand side of the page, the overall number of fire code violations has kept pace with the increase in overall inspections, and familiarity with ELMS assisted this, as well as the increased staffing levels in the division. We see a similar story in the overall number of fire inspections by building type, with numbers up significantly due to staff familiarity with ELMS, increased staffing levels, and the cross-training. The number is proportionally similar to prior years and is on par with 2015. The middle graph shows the permits issued, where the overall number is down slightly from 2017. This is reactionary work, and we feel that even accounting for the Super Bowl, the numbers are not significantly inconsistent with previous years. This permit data, of course, only accounts for those issued by regulatory services. As businesses start and expand and complex projects come through the city system, there are additional touch points in other departments. And I was asked to provide a little bit of additional information on permits. In looking at FIS's 3 major fire prevention permits, which are sprinklers, alarm, and suppression, roughly 2/3 were issued in wards 3 and 7. And the rest of the wards were fairly uniform, ranging from 1% to 6% of the overall permit volume. As we see business and residential growth outside of the downtown corridor, we may see this trend shift. The time needed to approve each permit is dependent upon the complexity of the plans and the size of the building. The median number of inspections required was 3 in 2017 and 2018, and it was about 2 to 3 weeks to approve, ranged from 2 to 3 weeks to make those approvals. Lastly, the chart on the right shows the number of hazardous materials licenses that were active at the end of 2018. City ordinance sets forth the classification of buildings as either low, medium, or high risk. This classification system is in addition to state law that requires buildings with high volumes of hazardous materials to report to the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. The city's ordinance goes above and beyond what is required in other municipalities and is intended to help city staff and local agencies better respond to an incident by having a fuller picture of the fuel, oil, and other substances that may be stored there. Moving on to operations and engagement. This newly merged division has both an internal department focus and an external focus, and the measures included in this report speak to some of the externally focused work. Beginning with our administrative hearings program, which the department oversees for 6 city departments, we see that there was an increase in citations appeals. The outcome proportions remain consistent, with about 6% of citations dismissed by the hearing officers. This program continues to expand its reach, adding additional types of citations to its roster. In 2018, for instance, safe and sick time, contract compliance, and minimum wage were all added to it. While the chart on the left looks at the program as a whole, the one on the right looks at the citations that were appealed of citations issued within regulatory services. And we can see this percentage continues to decrease. We attribute this decrease to both better orders and continued education. Calls about citations remain high, but our legal coordinator has been dedicating more time to educating callers about citations, the process, and as that education happens, fewer people are deciding to appeal. As discussed earlier in the presentation, the Homeowner Navigation Program, or H&P, works with seniors, veterans, disabled people, and low-income homeowners to help them abate their housing orders and stay in their homes. It does not have direct resources, but instead draws on available resources from the community. The program works with city, county, and the state, including community groups, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. And with ELMS, the opportunity arose to formally track H&P cases, replacing the previous practice of Excel spreadsheets. This resulted in a large data cleanup effort in 2017, which you can see from the number of closed cases that year. Moving to the right, you can see that we have attendance increased at community events from 2017, with a focus on more events on the topic of revocations and the effect on renters who live in those situations, in those buildings. And with that, my presentation is concluded. I'm available for additional questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Going back to the traffic control for a minute, one of the things I'm curious about is, obviously it makes a lot of sense that when you get complaints about parking through 311, by the time you get there, often that person is not still going to be parked there. Are you using that data to direct where proactive enforcement tends to go if you're getting a lot of calls about an area, even though those calls are resolving as gone on arrival? Are we using that data to inform the work that we're doing?
Through the chair, Councilmember Fletcher, traffic control agents are all assigned parts of the city to patrol, and the numbers of agents assigned to a particular area on a particular day at a particular hour, sometimes even, are determined by what is happening or what traditionally is happening in that area. So there's a number of factors that go into that, and call volume would be one of them.
Great. If I may follow up, one of the ways that I think we can improve our residents' experience would be to provide that feedback. I think a lot of times what happens is if you enter a parking problem in the 311 app, the response that you get back just says they were gone. And especially if it took us 12 hours, 24 hours to swing over there and see if the car was still parked in the bike lane or whatever. That's a frustrating answer, but if we can even provide a response in 311 that says, we went and checked it out, we're going to continue watching this area. Something that reflects that the data, that the call to 311 wasn't a useless exercise.
Yeah, that it mattered.
I think that would really improve people's experience of it, because I know you are responding, and I am seeing evidence of that in some of the places that I know are hotspots. So appreciate the work, and let's try to communicate it a little more.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I ask my colleagues if there's any other questions, earlier in your presentation, Ms. Keller, you mentioned a need to revise some SLAs, and I'm curious, do you have a timeline for that, or is that just something that we maybe should do for next time?
Chair Palmisano, now that results work has wrapped up, this is something that I'm very interested in getting started on. It's a little bit of a different story for each agency or for each division because, for instance, our SLAs that are dependent upon our ELM system is not as straightforward necessarily as those from traffic control that don't come directly through login. And so in terms of timelines on them, I don't know. We're working through all of that, but this is a priority of mine.
Thank you. The last question I have is about fire inspection services. In 2018, the number of inspections and code violations found increased rather significantly, I think 68% and 46% respectively, and the responses to 311 complaints with SLAs continues to trend in an upward direction. So can you help us mention some of the efforts that have been made to improve the fire inspection services performance? I think it's a positive story.
Thank you. Yes, Chair Palmisano, it is. We attribute this to a combination of factors. It is that we are now understanding ELMS and able to work in it better. We have additional capacity thanks to the efforts of the mayor and the city council, with 2 additional fire inspectors hired and working. And we decided to use one of those inspector positions for complaints and created another complaint division. So allocating our resources to prioritize those. Additionally, that cross-training that I referenced, there's just ripple effects throughout the division based on that added capacity.
Thank you. Without any other questions from my colleagues, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here. I'm going to move to receive and file all 4 of these departmental reports today. That's Finance and Property Services, Audit, Regulatory Services, and the City Clerk's Office. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries, and our meeting is adjourned for today. Thank you.